Red salute, comrades. I welcome you all today, African Liberation Day. Today marks the 62nd anniversary of African Liberation Day, commemorating the formation of Organization of Africa Union, renamed the African Union later, and which was formed earlier on the 25th of May in 1963. Yet it will be ahistorical to reduce this day to a mere date on the Gregorian calendar. The struggle for African liberation and Pan-Africanism long predates this moment. From the Haitian Revolution that overthrew the French colonial rule and liberated Africans from slavery from 1791 to 1804, to the early Pan-Africanist agitation of Alexander Crummell and Martin Delany, the seeds of resistance and unity were sown in the centuries of struggle. The Pan-Africanist vision did not begin with the formation of the Organization of African Union. It arose from long decades of inhuman conditions under slavery, colonialism, and imperialism. Its earliest ideological expressions carried strong racial dimensions, a reaction to white supremacy that subjected African people to barbarity during the transatlantic trade and the colonial conquest that followed it. These early forms were protests against racial domination. Early ideological debates among Pan-Africanist leaders such as Sylvester Williams, Marcus Garvey, W. Du Bois expressed the African people's determination to chart their own path to emancipation. Marcus Garvey's Universal Nigger Improvement Association emphasized black pride, self-reliance, and repatriation, initiatives rooted in the experience of oppression and aimed at asserting Africans' dignity. Even the Pan-African Congress, held in London and organized by William and Du Bois, sought only, for example, reforms within the League of Nations framework. These were necessary beginnings, but they remained reformist in content and idealist in orientation. We do not dismiss these early attempts, rather, we bring to light what has been buried by most bourgeois historians, that it was the scientific ideology of socialism that sharpened and elevated Pan-Africanism into a revolutionary weapon, providing it with a concrete program for the total liberation of Africa. The so-called nigger question had long been debated during the International Workingmen's Association and the Second International, but it was during the Comintern, the Third International from 1919 onward, that the question was rigorously engaged and systematically addressed. Du Bois himself noted that the nigger problem was the greatest test for American socialists. At the end of the Second Congress of the Comintern, Lenin's draft thesis on the national and the colonial question became the cornerstone of its resolution. Class struggle and imperialism were brought to the fore, and a clear program was outlined for the liberation of African people across the continent and the diaspora, from the Caribbean to the South America. A milestone came with the 6th Congress of the Comintern and its affiliated Red International of Labor Unions, which passed a resolution to form the International Trade Union Committee of Nigger Workers. This affirmed the centrality of the African liberation struggle within the world communist movement. This history is critical. There are persistent attempts to present socialism as a foreign ideology and to disconnect it from Pan-Africanism. Pseudo-Pan-African ideologues like Padmo not only distorted but outright slandered the role of the Comintern in African liberation. Others, including some post-colonial African leaders, tried to concoct ideological mixtures such as African socialism to try and reconcile the African past with anti-imperialist aspirations. But we know that once something has become a science, it assumes a universal validity. Socialism, as the science of society, must be studied and applied just like all other sciences. We must also appreciate the role played by the 5 early Pan-African Congresses convened by Du Bois in 1919, in 1921, in 1923, in 1927, and in 1945. These congresses created critical spaces for dialogue and unity among Africans from different parts of the world. The 5th Congress, held in Manchester in 1945, was particularly significant because for the first time it brought together African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Hastings Banda of Malawi, and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, who would later lead anti-colonial movements in their respective countries. The first Congress occurred at the close of the First World War and at the onset of the global economic depression. The 5th met at the end of the Second World War and at the eve of the Cold War. These were historical junctures that shaped the tactics of liberation movements across Africa and the world. The first All-African People's Congress, convened by Comrade Nkrumah in December 1958, was another milestone, which was held a year after Ghana's independence. The conference brought together over 300 political and trade union leaders from 28 African countries. In East Africa, revolutionary unity had already begun under the Pan-African Freedom Movement of East African Central Africa, called PAFMECA, formed in September 1958 under the leadership of Comrade Abdurrahman Babu of Zanzibar. Notably, when the PAFMECA delegation traveled to Accra via Congo, this is when they met Patrice Lumumba and even paid for his travel to the conference, which he was not aware of. This was a true gesture of solidarity. At the conference and at subsequent meetings, a major debate unfolded between Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere over the path of African unity. Though their strategies differed, their goal was the same: the creation of a single federal African state. Nkrumah advocated for immediate unification, warning against regional blocs that will balkanize the continent and serve imperialist interests. Nyerere, on the other hand, preferred gradualism, proposing regional federations as a stepping stone to continental unity. He even offered to delay Tanganyika's independence to wait for the federation with Kenya, Uganda, and Zanzibar. History has vindicated both of them. Most post-colonial states failed to realize the Pan-African ideal. Instead, they became puppet states for imperialist finance capital. Parochial nationalism was promoted, and even regional institutions like the East African Community, the ECOWAS, SADC, and even the African Union were turned into instruments of imperialist penetration, funded and directed by external powers. Political independence across Africa did not end imperialist domination. While we honor the role played by our forebearers in winning formal independence, we have a revolutionary duty to complete that process, to secure real independence through class struggle and revolutionary transformation. In many post-colonial African countries, the national bourgeoisie was either non-existent or weak, parasitic, and incapable of developing the productive forces. To maintain indirect rule, imperialism cultivated a local intermediary class, the comprada bourgeoisie. These lackeys and running dogs were entrusted with managing the neocolonial economy and the state machinery on behalf of international capital. As a result, the imperialist bourgeoisie remained the principal ruling class, with the comprada bourgeoisie as its local agents. Thus, the principal contradictions in our societies remains the contradiction between the working masses of Africa and imperialism. The comprada class is our immediate enemy. It is the class we must confront, defeat, and disarm in order to seize state power and build a revolutionary state capable of enforcing the people's democratic dictatorship and preparing the ground for socialism. This is the objective content and character of our revolution. It is a national democratic revolution, and having identified both our class enemies and our class allies, we must build the united front necessary to carry it through. The working class, though numerically small in the new colonies, is the most advanced revolutionary class. It must forge alliance with other revolutionary classes, especially the peasantry, who are the majority, and which is the numerically large and historically oppressed by imperialism. Because imperialist capital did not fully industrialize our societies, feudal relations persist alongside capitalist ones. This gives our revolution a dual character. It must overthrow both feudalism and imperialism, and the persistence of these semi-feudal relations is central to our revolutionary analysis and strategy. The NDR, or the National Democratic Revolution, guided by the strategy of the United Front, provides the path to achieve Pan-Africanist objective, the creation of a single socialist African federal state, with a planned economy and unified revolutionary military command. The heroic armed struggle of the Mau Mau remains our point of departure. Comrade Dedan Kimathi continues to inspire our party's mission to complete the NDR and the transition to socialism.
Long live the NDR, long live.
Long live. The national question must be understood in relation to the Pan-Africanist goal and within the framework of the world proletarian revolution. We must reject parochial and territorial nationalism. The national and social questions are dialectically linked and must be resolved together. Today, we see the countries of Sahel, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, pushing back against imperialism and reclaiming their sovereignty.
Long live the alliance of the Sahel states, long live.
Long live.
Down with French imperialism, down.
Down. While we may not yet define their movement as the new democracy in the Maoist sense, we recognize them as progressive ruptures in the imperialist order and essential contributions to the anti-imperialist front. As Mwalimu Julius Nyerere aptly put it, an African is one who identifies with the collective struggle of the African people and participates in the development of Africa, regardless of their skin color or ethnicity. Pan-Africanism must never be divorced from the global proletarian struggle. International solidarity has been crucial in the liberation of Africa. We pay revolutionary tribute to the Cuban people under the leadership of Comrade Fidel Castro. Cuba did not send troops, doctors, and educators to Africa out of charity, but out of revolutionary obligation. Over 30,000 Cuban volunteers stood shoulder to shoulder with African revolutionaries in Angola, in Namibia, in Mozambique, in Algeria, in Congo, in Guinea-Bissau, in Cape Verde, and South Africa. And many paid the price with their blood and their lives. To this day, Cuban doctors continue to serve across Africa, and Cuban institutions offer free education to thousands of African students. This sacrifice is precious to us. We must stand firmly with the Cuban Revolution, not out of charity, not out of repayment, but because solidarity against imperialism is our revolutionary duty. Long live the Cuban Revolution, long live!
Long live!
Long live the Cuban Revolution, long live!
Long live!
Long live Fidel Castro, long live!
Long live! Viva Comandante Fidel Castro, viva!
Viva! We also extend our solidarity to the people of Haiti, Lebanon, Congo, Sudan, Venezuela, Iran, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and most especially to our Palestinian brothers and sisters. These people remain strangled by imperialism. And as long as one people is oppressed, no people can be truly free. This is why African Liberation Day 2025 is dedicated to the people of Cuba as we mark the centenary of the birth of Comrade Comandante Fidel Castro. It is also a moment to reclaim Pan-Africanism, revolutionary kernel. Socialism. Socialism is the engine that powers African unity. It is the software that drives the hardware of Pan-Africanism. Without socialism, Pan-Africanism is directionless. Afrika moja, Afrika huru. Afrika moja, Afrika huru. Afrika ya kisoshalisti.